Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving straight into the absolutely fascinating 10,000-year evolution of money today. We are going to trace this massive journey together, from ancient ledgers all the way to modern digital trust, to see exactly how and why money transformed over the millennia. So let's kick things off with a question that kind of flips everything we think we know about commerce right on its head. For centuries, the standard economic story has basically been that early humans traded goods directly, swapping a dozen eggs for a pair of shoes, until it just got way too complicated, and so they invented money to make things easier. But is that actually how it happened? Well, anthropologist David Graeber completely shatters Adam Smith's classic fable here. His research shows that informal, community-building debt and credit actually existed millennia before physical cash or spot transaction barter. In early communities, there was this sort of everyday communism based on mutual expectations. You didn't swap goods immediately, you just helped a neighbor out, and they owed you a favor later. Pure, on-the-spot barter was incredibly rare, and usually only happened between strangers or hostile groups who simply didn't trust each other enough to extend credit. We've got a lot of ground to cover today. Here is our roadmap. First, the myth of barter. Second, shells as global currency. Third, the paper money revolution. Fourth, goldsmiths and fractional reserves. Fifth, the 1971 Nixon shock. And finally, the digital money era. Looking at this sweeping timeline of history, you can actually trace exactly when humanity crossed these massive thresholds, transitioning from social obligation to a physical commodity, then to paper, and finally to pure decree. It's amazing to see how each brand new form of money was engineered specifically to solve the logistical headaches of the previous era. Okay, Section 1, the myth of barter, how credit came first. Way back, as early as 3500 BCE in Sumer, economies were already relying on delayed exchanges and mutual expectations of debt. Think about it. If you give someone a coat on Monday and they promise to give you a lamp on Tuesday, that is intertemporal barter. During that gap, a debt exists. These informal social debts were eventually quantified mathematically through state-enforced systems like taxation and tribute. Actually, debt became such a powerful mathematical force in ancient times that farmers were frequently falling into debt peonage. This literally forced ancient kings to periodically cancel all debts across the board, a practice that later became known in ancient Israel as the Law of Jubilee. Moving right along to Section 2, shells as global currency, the reign of the cowrie. Now, to expand trade beyond those small, high-trust communities, humanity desperately needed a physical unit of account. Enter cowrie shells. These were harvested, cleaned, and exported globally, completely proving that money didn't actually need state minting to work. It just needed durability, portability, and symbolic value. Maldivian women would bury the live mollusks in sand pits on the beach until they died, then wash the shells in seawater to give them this perfectly smooth, shiny finish. Because these specific shells were nearly identical in size and basically forgery-proof, they became an incredibly reliable medium of exchange. They were so vital in ancient China that the Chinese character for money originally derived from a pictograph of a cowrie shell. To really put this into perspective, a single slave in early 19th century Bengal cost exactly 25,000 cowries. That one number perfectly demonstrates the massive scale, purchasing power, and unifying nature of this ancient currency network. The French East India Company even chartered massive ships whose main cargo was cowrie shells, trading them all the way over to the West African coast. Section 3. The Paper Money Revolution. Solving the weight of commerce. As trade routes exploded, carrying large amounts of heavy commodities or base metals became a massive logistical friction. Let's jump over to 8th century Tang Dynasty China to see how humanity solved this. Tea merchants there basically bypassed the absolute nightmare of hauling heavy strings of copper coins by inventing flying cash. They called it flying cash because the paper receipts were so incredibly light they could literally blow away in the wind. A merchant could securely deposit thousands of heavy copper coins at a government office, take a paper tally with an official seal, travel safely across the perilous Silk Road, and then just redeem that paper for local coins at their destination. This fundamentally decoupled the physical weight of money from its actual purchasing power. Fast forward a few centuries, and Johan Palmstruch solved a very similar problem over in Sweden. His bank, Stockholm's Banco, started issuing paper credit notes because the Swedish currency system at the time relied on these massive copper plates. Making a large payment literally required a horse and cart. So these paper credit notes became the very first modern European banknotes, allowing citizens to carry immense purchasing power in an envelope instead of a wagon. Section 4. Goldsmiths and fractional reserves. The illusion of the vault. This shift to paper really paved the way for modern banking. Following the Spanish conquest of the Americas, a huge flood of gold entered Europe. People deposited this gold with London goldsmiths for safekeeping, getting paper receipts in return. But pretty soon, people just started trading the receipts instead of lugging around the heavy gold. And here was the light bulb moment. The goldsmiths realized they could safely issue way more paper receipts as interest-bearing loans than the actual physical gold sitting down in their vaults. So why did this actually work? Well, because those paper chits circulated as money, the goldsmiths noticed that only about 10 to 20% of depositors ever came back to withdraw their physical metal at any one time. By keeping just a fraction of the gold in reserve, they effectively created money out of thin air, transforming themselves from simple vault operators right into the first true modern bankers. Section 5. The 1971 Nixon Shock. The end of the gold peg. The tension between paper claims and physical gold eventually had to reach a breaking point. By 1971, the U.S. had lost 50% of its gold reserves in just 25 years. Under the Bretton Woods system, set up back in 1944, foreign countries could exchange their dollars for American gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. But as the U.S. printed more and more dollars, foreign central banks got nervous. They started cashing in their dollars for physical gold, draining the U.S. Treasury and forcing a monumental structural shift in global finance. Faced with a massive, looming gold run, Nixon had to act. On August 15, 1971, he declared he would suspend, temporarily, the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets. Now, even though this was framed as a temporary measure to thwart international money speculators, there was absolutely no going back. This single action dismantled the international monetary order, fully severing that ancient tie between money and a physical commodity. The impact of this shift is just staggering. Since that 1971 shock, the dollar has lost roughly 87% of its purchasing power, while the price of gold has surged a mind-blowing 12,300%, from its fixed $35 peg to over $4,300 today. The pricing of gold today is essentially just a mathematical reflection of the sheer volume of fiat currency created since that last physical constraint was removed. Because dollar-denominated reserves are now fully exposed to inflation, we see this economic paradox known as the Triffin dilemma persisting today. The country issuing the global reserve currency has to run trade deficits to supply the world with money, which eventually undermines confidence in that very currency. This vulnerability has led global central banks in places like China, India, and Poland to aggressively purchase over 1,000 tons of gold annually in recent years. They are literally returning to the very commodity that underpinned the system before 1971. Which leads us to our final chapter. Section 6. The Digital Money Era. Trust without the state. You know, throughout history, from that Sumerian intertemporal debt to the Tang Dynasty's flying cash, all the way to unbacked fiat currency, money has constantly been this evolving technology of trust. The Nixon shock wasn't the invention of paper money, as we saw that happened centuries earlier, but it was the final removal of its physical anchor. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If money is fundamentally just a way to scale trust across strangers, and history shows us this constant pendulum swing between physical commodities and abstract credit, what actually happens next? Will our future rely entirely on state decrees, or will it return to decentralized mathematical proof? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating architectural history of trust with me today. Keep asking questions and keep learning.